This is not the kind of story you hear every day. Out on the frontier, you expect tales of cattle rustlers, gunfights, maybe a storm rolling through that takes a roof clean off a homestead. But this is a magnificent tale of a man who didn't go looking for mystery, but found it anyway in the form of lace caught on sagebrush. So lean in, make yourself comfortable, and don't forget, if you enjoy these journeys into forgotten corners of the frontier, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to The Forgotten Frontier. There's plenty more where this came from. Now, let's introduce Samuel Harlow. Samuel wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. At 49, he had the face of someone who had weathered more wind than laughter, and eyes that held more silence than words. Folks in town called him a quiet one, not with disdain but with a shrug, as if he was part of the landscape itself. Steady and unchanging, he lived alone on a modest spread of land a few miles outside Dry Creek, a little ranch that wasn't much to look at, but was enough for one man and a few head of cattle. His house was plain clapboard, roof patched in places with tin. The porch sagged just slightly under the weight of years, and the barn leaned the way old barns do. Tired, but still standing, Samuel rose before the sun most days, poured black coffee into a tin cup, and walked the fence lines with his dog, a rangy mutt named Bristle. Work filled his hours, mending wire, tending cattle, chopping wood, hauling water. When the day's tasks were done, he might ride into town for flour or sugar, maybe tobacco, then ride back before anyone had a chance to draw him into talk. He wasn't unfriendly, just contained. The kind of man who kept his words folded up inside like a letter never mailed. That's the shape of Samuel Harlow's life on most days. But on one particular late afternoon, with the light running low and the heat of summer still shimmering above the earth, something different found him. He had ridden into town that morning, collected supplies, exchanged a few polite nods, and started back the long way, across the dry wash that cut through sage and mesquite. Bristle trotted ahead, tongue-lolling, as Samuel let his horse pick its way along the rough ground. That's when he saw it at first. It looked like nothing more than fabric caught on the brush. Bits of cloth sometimes blew loose from wagons or washed-up camps. But this wasn't common calico or a rag. No, it was white lace. The kind that shimmered faintly even under dust. He slowed his horse, leaned down, and saw it proper, the hem of a wedding dress tangled in sage. Torn, dirt-streaked, but delicate all the same. And stranger still, when he touched it, the fabric was warm, as if it hadn't been lying there long. He straightened, eyes narrowing at the ground. There faint impressions in the dust, not hooves, not boots. Bare feet smaller than his own, leading away from the brush and across the wash. Samuel sat there for a long moment, reins slack in his hands. It wasn't his business. He told himself that. A man who lived quiet learned to stay out of other folks' affairs. But still, a wedding dress didn't just end up in the dirt for no reason. The longer he sat, the more the silence pressed on him. Bristle gave a sharp bark, nose tilted toward the tracks, and Samuel made his decision. He swung down from the saddle, crouched low, and touched one of the prints. Fresh. The edges hadn't yet crumbled. Whoever left them was close. He stood, adjusted his hat, and began to follow. Now, let's pause here a moment, because this is where the frontier itself comes into play. You've got to understand what kind of land Samuel was walking into. The dry wash stretched wide, a vein of pale earth carved by rains that hadn't come in months. Sagebrush dotted the banks, brittle and gray-green. Mesquite trees hunched here and there, branches twisted like old bones. The sky above was endless, that kind of big, empty blue that makes a man feel smaller than he already is. Every step Samuel took was accompanied by the crunch of grit, the soft scuffle of Bristle's paws, and the faint whisper of wind sliding. Through brush the footprints wove unevenly, as though the one who left them had no clear direction or was too weary to keep a straight path. Sometimes they staggered close together, sometimes they spread apart as though the walker had stumbled Samuel, followed with the patience of a man used to long silences, and then he saw her not right away. At first, just the glimmer of fabric again. This time not caught on sage, but trailing across the ground like a ghost had passed. Then, beneath a mesquite tree leaning over the wash, the figure of a woman sitting in the shade. She wore white, though it was no longer crisp. Dust clung to her skirts, streaked across her arms. Her hair was pinned high, though strands had fallen loose, sticking to her damp face. She sat with her back against the trunk, hands clasped loosely in her lap, eyes closed as though she had come a long way and needed a moment just to breathe. For a second, Samuel thought of turning back. A man like him had no business approaching a woman in such a state. But then she stirred, opened her eyes, and looked straight at him. There was no scream, no startle. Only a calm gaze, steady and unafraid, as though she had been expecting him all along. "Ma'am," Samuel said finally, voice low and careful. The woman tilted her head, a faint, almost weary smile tugging at her lips. "Changed my mind," she said softly, as if that explained everything. Her voice was clear, but tired. "I suppose you could say I left in the middle of things." Samuel shifted his weight, unsure what to say. Bristle circled once, sniffed at the hem of her skirt, then sat back with a small whine. The woman glanced at the dog, then back to Samuel. "Water?" she asked. Simply he unslung his canteen, stepped forward, and held it out. She drank, slow and measured, before handing it back with a nod of thanks. Now, Samuel Harlow wasn't a man for questions, but even he felt them burning at the back of his throat. A wedding dress in the dust. A woman sitting alone beneath a tree. Words about changing her mind. But the frontier had taught him something long ago. Sometimes silence serves better than speech. So he didn't ask. He simply waited, reins still in hand, as the sun dipped lower and the long shadows stretched across the washoe. What does Samuel do next? Does he walk away, or decides to stay? Or maybe he decides to follow those strange tracks deeper into mystery. Well, that's a choice that carries us into the heart of what happened next, so stick with me. Because this story isn't finished yet, and what lies beyond that mesquite tree will surprise you more than you think. Samuel Harlow had learned long ago that silence could stretch between two people and not necessarily be uncomfortable. With Margaret Dale, though he didn't know her name yet, the silence felt different. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that left room for unspoken things to gather like storm clouds on the horizon. She leaned back against the mesquite trunk, pale fingers brushing dirt from the folds of her dress. Though the gown had once been fine, made for a church aisle or a dance floor, now it looked out of place here, a relic of another world. Dust clung to the lace, and a tear along the hem fluttered in the evening breeze. Her shoes, small satin slippers, dangled from one hand. Bare feet pressed lightly into the dirt. Samuel cleared his throat. "You alone out here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, considering him, then gave a small shrug. "Alone enough." Her voice was soft, with a faint tremor beneath it, though whether from exhaustion or something deeper, Samuel couldn't tell. He nodded, gaze slipping toward the horizon. The sun was burning low, orange and red spilling across the wash. A man could only stand still so long before the dark caught him. "Best not to linger out here past nightfall," he said again. That faint smile touched her lips. "You're heading back then?" "Toward my place," he said. Then, after a pause, "You're welcome to ride a stretch with me. Safer than walking alone." Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable. Finally, she pushed herself to her feet with slow grace. She brushed dust from her skirt, steadied herself, and said, "All right." Samuel helped her onto his horse, settling her carefully in the saddle before leading the reins himself. He walked, boots crunching through dry earth, while she rode in silence. Bristle padded along beside them, ears flicking at every sound the trail wound upward from the wash toward a line of low hills. The last light of the sun caught the woman's profile, the curve of her jaw, the loosened tendrils of her pinned hair, the weariness set deep in her expression. Samuel kept his gaze ahead, though he felt her eyes on him more than once, as though measuring the man she had decided to trust. After a while, she spoke again. "Do you always ride this way?" "Alone?" "Mostly." He glanced at her. "Don't suit everyone, but it suits me." "You don't get lonely?" Samuel thought about that. He thought of the long nights on his porch, the sound of wind rattling the tin roof, the empty chair across the table when he ate supper. He thought of how he sometimes caught himself talking low to Bristle just to fill the air. Finally, he shook his head. "You get used to quiet. After a while, it's company enough." She hummed faintly, as if in disagreement, but said nothing more by the time twilight deepened. Samuel knew they'd never make it to his ranch before dark. The trail was rough, and the woman looked spent already. He led them toward a cluster of cottonwoods near a trickle of creek, a place he knew well, where travelers often made camp. There he spread his bedroll near the roots of a cottonwood, set a small fire, and pulled beans and jerky from his saddlebags. The woman sat opposite him, skirts fanned out, watching the flames catch. She seemed lighter in the fire's glow, almost younger than she'd first appeared. Though shadows flickered in her eyes when he handed her a tin plate, she accepted it with a quiet "thank you." She ate slowly, deliberately, as though each bite took effort. Samuel didn't press her for talk. He ate in silence too, fire crackling between them, night closing in around their small circle of light. At length, she set her plate down and lifted her gaze. "You're not going to ask me anything?" Samuel looked up from his meal. "Figure you'll tell me what you want me to know, or you won't." Her lips curved faintly, though it wasn't quite a smile. Most men would have asked already. "Who I am, where I came from, why I'm walking barefoot through the wash in a wedding gown." "Most men," Samuel said evenly, "aren't me." That earned him a low chuckle, brief but genuine. The sound surprised even her, as though it had escaped without permission. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, leaned back against the cottonwood, and fell quiet again. The night settled deep and cool. Coyotes yipped in the distance. Bristle lay curled near Samuel's boots, tail twitching. The woman, her back still against the tree, shawl drawn close, let her head droop slowly until her eyes fluttered shut. Within minutes, she was asleep. Samuel sat awake longer. He studied the lines of her face in the firelight, the way her hair had slipped loose, the faint crease between her brows even in sleep. Whoever she was, whatever she had walked away from, it was heavy enough to bring her out here to the hills in nothing but lace and dust, when the fire burned down to embers. Samuel lay back on his bedroll, hat tipped low, and let the stars wheel overhead. His last thought before sleep took him was simple. Tomorrow would bring choices, whether he wanted them or not. Morning came crisp and cool, pale light spilling across the cottonwoods. Bristle stirred first, ears pricked. Samuel blinked awake, stretched, and turned toward the tree where the woman had been. She was gone. The shawl lay folded neatly by the fire pit. The wedding dress, too, was gone, carried with her. Only her footprints remained, pressed fresh in the soft dirt. Leading away into the hills, Samuel sat up slowly, eyes narrowing at the trail she had left behind. No note, no explanation. Just tracks in the dust, winding deeper into the unknown. He exhaled, low and long. Then, without a word, he kicked dirt over the embers, shouldered his saddlebags, and whistled for Bristle. The footprints stretched ahead, waiting. And Samuel, a man who never sought mystery, felt himself drawn to follow them once again, a quiet rancher, a runaway bride, a single night by the fire, and by dawn, nothing left but footprints in the dust leading further into the hills. Stay with me, because this story isn't finished just yet. The heart of this story is about to settle, and we are about to find out where the track Samuel follows will lead him. What truth lies behind the woman's strange flight, and how it all closes on the quiet frontier. The first thing Samuel Harlow noticed as he trailed those footprints into the morning light was how small they looked. Bare feet pressed into soft earth, narrow, careful steps threading between rocks and sage. A woman's trail, yes, but more than that, a trail of someone uncertain. Someone who didn't quite know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. He followed slowly, reins in hand, Bristle's hooves crunching the gravel as the horse plodded behind. There was no rush, not yet. The day was cool, and the sky still carried that pale clarity only morning on the frontier could bring. Samuel had spent a lifetime reading sign, hoof marks, wagon tracks, trails worn deep by men who'd long since gone, and he knew better than to hurry. The land revealed its stories only to patient eyes as he moved. He thought back to the night before. The shawl folded neatly, the faint laugh she'd given by the fire, the way she had eaten each bite as though she were forcing herself. It lingered with him, not romance exactly, nor pity, but something harder to name. A sense that he had brushed against a life at the edge of breaking, and now found himself unwilling to step away. The footprints carried him out of the cottonwoods, across a low ridge, and into a hollow where the earth cracked dry and pale. Samuel stopped there, crouched, and pressed his palm lightly to the tracks. Still fresh. Not more than an hour ahead he rose, adjusted his hat against the sun, and walked on now. I know what you might be thinking. Why follow her at all? Why chase a stranger into the hills, especially when she'd slipped away without a word? For most men, it would have ended at the fire, but Samuel Harlow was not most men. He had lived too long with silence not to recognize when someone else carried a silence heavier than his own. And whether he admitted it or not, that silence drew him in by midday. The land grew harsher. The footprints angled toward a narrow draw, shaded by boulders and scattered mesquite. Samuel ducked into it, and soon enough he saw her. Margaret sat on a rock, her dress gathered around her knees, hair coming loose from its pins. She didn't start when he appeared, though she must have heard Bristle's steps long before. Instead, she looked up at him with an expression that was half resigned, half curious. "You're persistent," she said softly. Samuel tipped his hat. "And you walk loud enough." That earned the faintest smile, but it vanished quickly. She folded her hands in her lap, gaze slipping away. "You shouldn't have followed." "Maybe not," Samuel admitted. "But I did." For a long while they sat in silence, the dry wind stirring between them. Finally, she spoke again. "I didn't run from the altar," she said, eyes fixed on the dust. "Not exactly. I left before it began." Samuel didn't answer. He didn't press. He just stood, waiting. Margaret drew a breath. "My family. They wanted the match. Said it was sensible. Said it would keep us steady. But the man," she broke off, shaking her head. "He was kind enough, maybe. but not mine, not in the ways that mattered. And when I stood in that dress with the veil pinned to my hair, I realized I couldn't walk forward, not one more step. So I walked out. Her voice cracked at the edges. Though she fought to keep it level, I thought maybe if I kept moving, the hills would swallow me, that I'd vanish before anyone could drag me back. She looked up at Samuel then, eyes sharp despite the weariness. But you found me. Now, let me pause right here. You can feel the weight of that moment, can't you? A woman with dust on her wedding gown, telling her truth to a man she's known less than a day. It's the kind of story that hangs in the air, heavy but fragile. Like a lantern flame in the wind. Samuel studied her quietly, then gave a small nod. Hills won't swallow you whole. World's not that merciful. Her laugh was short, bitter. So I've learned. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a canteen, and offered it. She took it gratefully, drinking deep, then resting the cool metal against her cheek. What now? Samuel asked. Margaret blinked, caught off guard. You've walked this far, but where to next? Can't keep wandering in a wedding dress forever. Her gaze dropped to the fabric, torn and dust-stained. For a long time she didn't answer. Finally she said, I don't know. The day wore on. Samuel didn't force her to move, didn't try to decide for her. Instead, he built a small fire in the shade of the rocks, and together they shared what little food he had left. They spoke in fits and starts, not much, but enough. She told him her name, finally, Margaret Dale. He repeated it once, quietly, as though testing it. Wait, she asked about him in turn. He gave her little, just that he ran cattle, that his land stretched wider than he could work alone, that he had no wife, no children, no one waiting for him at night, but a horse and a faithful dog. That doesn't sound lonely to you? She asked. Samuel gave a faint shrug. Lonely's just a word. Some wear it heavier than others. The look she gave him then was sharp, almost searching, but she didn't press. By evening, the air cooled again, and Samuel built another fire. This time, Margaret didn't keep her distance. She sat across from him, dress pulled tight around her knees, shawl draped over her shoulders. The firelight painted her face softer, younger, though the crease between her brows never fully faded when she finally slept. Curled on the bedroll he offered, Samuel sat awake, staring at the flames. He knew, in that quiet way men sometimes know, that this wasn't a story meant to last. She wasn't built for the hills, wasn't made to vanish into silence the way he had. By morning, she would move again, maybe back toward town, maybe deeper into the horizon. And he, as always, would be left to ride on, but still, he watched over her until the fire burned low. Bristles standing guard just beyond the circle of light. Dawn broke clear and pale. Samuel stirred, reached for his hat, and turned toward where Margaret had slept. The bedroll was empty. The dress, too, was gone. Only a faint trail of footprints led away from the fire, deeper into the hills. Samuel sat there for a long while, staring at the space she'd left behind. No note, no word. Just the same silence she'd carried from the moment he first saw her. Finally, he rose, kicked dirt over the embers, and shouldered his saddlebags. He looked once toward the tracks leading deeper, then once toward the wide trail back home. After a moment's pause, he turned for home. And that's how it ended. A quiet rancher, a runaway bride, one night by the fire, and a story that slipped through his fingers like dust. He didn't follow a second time. Some things, Samuel Harlow knew, weren't meant to be caught, but for the rest of his life, when he rode those hills, he'd remember the lace tangled in the sagebrush, the footprints leading away, and the brief company of a woman who chose the open horizon over the altar. And in the end, Maybe that was enough. That, my friends, is the story of Samuel Harlow and the stranger in the wedding dress. A tale of silence, choices, and the fleeting ways lives cross on the forgotten frontier. If you felt the pull of this story, if it left you picturing the dust, the firelight, the quiet between words, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one, because out here, on the frontier, even the smallest tracks can lead to the greatest tales.